Welcome to Parental Alienation and Narcissism. This program is to provide awareness, educational topics that will help you heal and navigate through the hardships associated with narcissistic alienation. Please like and subscribe.
Welcome to Video 6. My name is J. Claude McDaniel, author and victim of alienation. I share my experiences, education, and provide valuable information that I hope will help you navigate through your plight. In this 6th episode, I take you from healing begins with truth to reclaiming your life after alienation. Healing begins with truth. The birthday card was still in Alex's hands. The edges had begun to bend from years of carrying it. It had never been opened, never read, never answered. Alex sat alone on a park bench, staring across a playground filled with children and parents. Years had passed since he last saw his daughter. Years since she stopped answering calls. Years since she stopped responding to letters. Years since she began seeing him as the villain in a story he never wrote. Yet he still came, still hoped, still loved. Because after years of pain, Alex had finally learned something important. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning how to live beyond it. It's about building something meaningful from the pieces left behind. And for Alex, that journey began with a difficult truth. He had to stop pretending he wasn't hurt. For years he buried the pain. He told himself to stay strong, to move forward, to keep going. But denial has a cost. The wounds you refuse to acknowledge never truly heal. They simply remain hidden beneath the surface, waiting, growing, affecting every part of your life. Real healing began the moment Alex allowed himself to admit what had happened. Parental alienation had stolen something precious, not only from him, but from his daughter as well. It had stolen memories, experiences, conversations, milestones, years that could never be recovered. Acknowledging that loss was painful, like tearing away an old bandage that had been covering a wound for far too long. But it was necessary, because healing can only begin when the truth is finally faced. One of the most important lessons Alex learned was that alienation is not love. It is not protection. It is not parenting. It is control disguised as concern. And until both targeted parents and alienated children recognize that reality, recovery remains difficult. For a long time, Alex believed reconciliation would happen through one perfect conversation, one dramatic breakthrough, one emotional reunion. But life rarely works that way. Healing is rarely dramatic. More often it's quiet, slow, and built one small step at a time. Alex stopped trying to force answers. He stopped demanding explanations. He stopped pressuring for meetings that weren't wanted. Instead, he chose something far more difficult: patience. He continued sending birthday cards, holiday greetings, short messages, simple reminders that said, "I'm here. I love you." The door remains open. No conditions, no guilt, no demands, just consistency. Because trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt through pressure. It can only be rebuilt through time, through reliability, through unwavering love. But as Alex continued this journey, he discovered something unexpected. Healing wasn't only about reconnecting with his daughter. It was also about reconnecting with himself. And that realization would force him to confront losses he had spent years trying to avoid. In the next section B of this episode, we'll explore how targeted parents begin reclaiming their identity, rebuilding their self-worth, and finding hope after years of loss and isolation. Because before you can rebuild a relationship with someone else, you must first rebuild your relationship with yourself. Reclaiming your life after alienation. When people talk about parental alienation, they often focus on the child, the lost relationship, the missed birthdays, the unanswered phone calls, the years of silence. But there's another part of the story that rarely gets discussed. What happens to the parent left behind? What happens when the court hearings end? When the legal battles are over? When the house grows quiet? For Alex, the hardest battle wasn't in the courtroom. It was learning how to live after the loss. For years, his identity had been consumed by the fight. Every decision revolved around protecting his relationship with his daughter. Every spare moment was spent documenting events, responding to accusations, and trying to prove he was a good father. The battle became his life. And when the conflict finally settled into silence, Alex found himself asking a question he had avoided for years. Who am I now? The answer wasn't easy. Because recovery required him to face losses he had spent years trying not to think about. The parties he missed, the holidays spent alone, the family traditions that never happened, the milestones that passed without him, the ordinary moments most parents take for granted. A simple phone call, a shared laugh, a conversation over dinner. The losses weren't always dramatic, but they were real, and grieving them became an important part of healing. For a long time, Alex believed grief was weakness. He believed strong people simply moved on. But he eventually learned that grief is not a sign of weakness. It's evidence that something valuable was lost. And pretending those losses didn't matter only gave them more power. So he allowed himself to mourn, not to stay trapped in the pain, but to acknowledge it, to honor it, and eventually to move through it. At the same time, Alex learned something equally important. Healing required boundaries. For years, toxic dynamics had controlled his emotional life. Every accusation demanded a response. Every crisis demanded attention. Every manipulation pulled him back into the conflict. He was living in a constant state of reaction. But recovery meant stepping off that battlefield. It meant recognizing that not every attack deserved a response. Not every accusation deserved a defense. Not every conflict deserved his energy. For the first time in years, Alex began protecting his peace instead of defending his reputation. And slowly something remarkable happened. He began rediscovering himself. The person he was before the accusations, before the court battles, before the years of emotional warfare. He remembered his strengths, his values, his accomplishments. He realized he was more than the labels others had attached to him, more than the rumors, more than the lies, more than the role of target. And while that process was empowering, it wasn't easy. Healing never follows a straight line. Some days brought hope. Others brought heartbreak. There were moments of progress. And moments when old wounds reopened. A holiday. A birthday. A family gathering. A photograph. Any of these could trigger a wave of sadness. But Alex eventually learned that setbacks didn't mean failure. They were simply part of the process. Healing wasn't about never hurting again. It was about learning how to keep moving forward despite the hurt. Meanwhile, somewhere beyond the silence, there were stories like Emily's. Emily was 29 years old when she finally began questioning the narrative she had grown up believing. For most of her life, she had accepted a version of events that portrayed her father as uncaring and absent. She never questioned it. Why would she? The story had been repeated for years. It had become part of her identity. But eventually, inconsistencies appeared. Conversations didn't add up. Old memories resurfaced. Questions emerged. And slowly, a painful truth began revealing itself. The anger she carried wasn't entirely her own. The distance wasn't entirely her choice. The relationship she lost had been shaped by years of influence she never recognized. The realization was devastating. Because uncovering the truth didn't just bring clarity. It brought grief. Grief for the years lost. Grief for the memories that never happened. Grief for a relationship that might have been very different under other circumstances. For Emily, healing meant confronting those realities without becoming consumed by guilt. It meant understanding that as a child, she had made decisions based on the information she was given. It meant recognizing manipulation without allowing shame to define her future. She sought therapy. She reflected. She questioned long-held beliefs. And eventually, she took a step she once thought impossible. She reached out. Carefully. Cautiously. Without expectations. Because rebuilding trust takes time. Whether you're the parent or the child. And that's one of the most important lessons in this story. Healing doesn't require perfection. It requires willingness. A willingness to face difficult truths. A willingness to grow. A willingness to risk connection again. For many families, professional help becomes a critical part of that journey. Therapists trained in trauma and family systems. Support groups filled with people who understand the experience. Reunification programs designed to rebuild damaged relationships. Sometimes healing requires guidance. Sometimes it requires community. And sometimes it simply requires knowing you're not alone. Because recovery isn't about pretending the abuse never happened. It's about refusing to let the abuse write the ending. And that may be the most powerful lesson of all. Parental alienation wounds deeply. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for decades. But it does not have to define the rest of your life. Healing often begins with small acts of courage. A birthday card sent without expectation. A boundary drawn without guilt. A difficult truth spoken aloud. A decision to keep loving without surrendering your self-respect. These moments may seem insignificant, but together they create something powerful. They create freedom. Because when you choose healing, you're doing more than surviving. You're breaking a cycle. For yourself, for your children, and for generations that follow. The past may explain what happened, but it does not have to dictate what happens next. This ends part 5 of my narration. Part 6 will be speaking to the alienation by the abusing parent. Thank you for reviewing my site and listening to part 5. Please like, subscribe, and comment. It helps this valuable site to grow and spread sound educational information. Sincerely, J. Claude McDaniel.